Hey guys, Tom here with another episode of Audio Post-Production 101, and today we're going to be starting our sound effects edit on this scene. I'm actually going to take you through a couple other scenes that might have a little more interesting sound effect moments that we can talk about, but just to start off with, we've finished our dialogue edit on this scene, and what I'm going to do, I've already done this, but save as, and I've already saved this as sound effects edit. That way, like I've talked about in the other episodes, I can go back if I mess something up or if I need to go back to a previous step. There's some copies. You could even put the date on there just so you know when you started it and when you finished it. But I've got this saved as sound effects edit. I'm going to keep the dialogue tracks in here because I'd rather hear this clip gained and somewhat cleaned up dialogue versus this nasty old guide track. If you're just doing sound effects, you're not going to have them. You got to use the guide track. Maybe get a cleaned up guide track from the dialogue editor. I'm lucky I've edited this dialogue, so I've got it in my session, but I don't necessarily want to see it because it's just going to add up to a lot of tracks, and we'll save those lot of tracks for the mix. So I'm going to hide them. I'm going to keep them active, so when I play it back,
You should have seen that.
we still got juice. I'm also going to keep these temp sound effects on here because I might want to grab stuff from them, or I might want to, audition them quickly, and it's just nice to have them in the session already. Plus, if you're delivering a sound effects edit session to a mixer, a lot of the times they like you to keep the temp sound effects from the OMF and just have them kind of cleaned up and, ready for them to play for the director if they're like, well, go back to the temp. They got those temp sound effects there. So, before we dive into track layout and all that stuff, sound effects can be broken up into, if you count Foley, then that's another group, but to me, Foley is a completely different animal, and I'll be covering that down the road. Just for sound effects editing, as a sound effects editor, your responsibilities are the hard effects, which would be things like doors, cars, guns, punches. If I'm really going to be clear about this, we can put sound design on a different line here. So you've got hard effects to maybe include sound design, although maybe not. And then your backgrounds or your ambience. In different countries, different markets, they'll call it different things. Actually, a lot of times on bigger shows, these will be broken up to multiple people. You might have one guy just doing cars and one person doing sound design and one person doing the backgrounds. I really like backgrounds. They're one of my favorite things, so that's what we're going to be starting with today. And then we'll probably roll these hard effects and sound design into one episode. You could do multiple hours and days of training on those, but this is just broad strokes. This whole course is broad strokes. So, as I said, we'll be doing backgrounds and ambience today. And what we've got to do to start with is we are faced with basically a blank session again. So we need to add some tracks. Now, similar to the dialogue edit, we're going to have a set of A and a set of B tracks so we can checkerboard scenes. So I'm going to do 4 mono ambience. Let's call these A mono ambience. I'm going to do 8 stereo AST AMB. And we'll do 4, again, we're basically duplicating the same thing, B mono ambience, and 8 stereo B stereo ambience. And I like to do 4 and 8 and 16 and 24 because it just lines up nicely on a mixer. And I found that for most projects, this is enough backgrounds. For some of them, it's like too many background tracks. And I'm going to color code them. The other thing I'll do, and this will come down the road, you'll see more why. I'm going to group these by hitting Command G, and we're going to call this A ambience, or ABG. And we're going to do the same for B, so Shift click, Command G, B ambience. Okay, now what should happen if I hit Shift Command G which enables groups, is now I can edit them in blocks. I've got all my tracks that I'm going to be cutting onto here. Now to make things super organized, and really something that I could do at the very beginning of getting the film, is make a cut track. So I'm going to show you how to do that right now. This doesn't even need to have an output, it's just for blank audio regions. And a lot of the time the supervising sound editor will do this, or an assistant. This is just going to give me regions where there's a cut on scene. Sometimes you do it by shot, but since I'm going to be cutting backgrounds, I just want to know where it cuts back and forth between two locations. You don't have to do this. It's kind of a, you know, extra credit brownie points thing, but it does help you visually see like where scenes are cut or where locations are cut, and that can be useful sometimes. So I'm just going frame by frame, hitting Option Command G, doing a region group, clicking back, tabbing over, and doing the same thing until I get through the entire scene. All right, so there's our cut track. We can visually see where all the cuts are. So I think we're ready to start adding sounds to this. Before we jump into that, just a quick difference. There's two different kinds of ambience, like categories. There's static, which is like your room tones and your hums, and they just kind of sit and they don't do anything. That's why I have a straight line here. They're just, even the audio looks like that. It's just a flat line of basically noise. And that's going to help with your production sound. If you match the pitch and the timbre of the static ambience that you cut to the noise that's already in the production sound, it's really nice, because if the mixer wants to take that out and, you know, have control over every line of dialogue by taking more of the noise out, then they can, but they've still got that static ambience that will kind of add some back that's taken out. It also helps with the ADR and just Foley, and it kind of glues everything to the center channel. So a lot of that stuff ends up being mono. Now your dynamic ambience is going to be stuff like traffic and wind and birds, stuff that has peaks and valleys and comes in, comes out, and that's where all the really nice creative stuff happens. But you've got to have both. If you have too many static layers, then it's just going to be pink noise and it's going to sound super noisy and not good. And if you have too many dynamic layers, it's going to be too busy, and you'll pull focus off of the other sound, whether it's music or dialogue. So always go with story first. For a simple apartment scene, you might only have one mono ambience track. You might want to just bring everything into the center channel, focus everything in, versus if you're in the jungles of Nam and you've got VCs and you've got helicopters and birds and wind and explode, like that can be a ton of tracks, and those are all dynamic. So just let the scene guide how many and how much. You'll kind of know when you've got it right, because you'll just be watching the video and it'll sound like it looks. So as far as library management, I'm going to use Soundly for this. I've been using it for, I think, a couple months now after using SoundMiner for many years, and they're both great. I wanted to try Soundly specifically for this course because it's kind of like the beginner sound effects management software. It's got a pretty cool cloud feature where you get access to some of their sounds, but I wanted to see how it dealt with my library, which is around 2 terabytes, and just kind of be able to compare it to SoundMiner. I'm not going to get too far in the weeds on Soundly. I really want to focus on just kind of what sounds I'm going to be adding to this. Knowing search terms for whatever library you're going to use, I know I need some interior traffic, so I do int traf, and I found this one, you know, that works good. And if I want to do some room tone air, then, you know, all this stuff will come up, and I know this is my money dead air that I made like 10 years ago that has that perfect pitch to match the whatever hum they had on on most of the sets. For US sets, it's 60 hertz, not 50. And then I'm gonna need some party, maybe like 20 people partying. That's nice. And then I'm also gonna want, I know I have a good Spanish radio that I could. That's good. Stuff that has language in it, like this is Spanish, or if you do English or Portuguese or French or whatever, if it's very discernible what words are being said, you will want to make some extra tracks where it's called, for example, ENG Ambience or ENG BG, and then color code that. That'll let the mixer know, like, hey man, there's some language on here that doesn't go to the M&E, because they will flag it if they can hear what they're saying. They'll say, hey, there's English dialogue in the M&E, you can't do that. So then they'll still route that to the sound effects stem, but in the M&E, they'll just mute it, and it won't make it to the M&E. All right, I've got some sounds in here that I've cut. And what I've done is for this whole 2-minute chunk, because we cut back and forth from one place to another, I've just dragged them out for this whole scene. And this is all going to be Jack's pad right now. So just... So that's all them together, just to go through the individual layers. Here's my Spanish radio. Very subtle. Air tone. This is a stereo air tone, but it has some nice carbis in it. And it pairs really nicely with this, which I have put some filtering on. So you just click this here to open up your clip effects and enable. So here all the high frequency. So I've got it rolled off around 1.5K. If you have two sparse tracks, they will often sound better together than if you just had one really busy track. It's also nice because in 5.1 you can pan one of them to the rear speakers a little more and just decorrelate it from the front. But having like two sparse tracks versus one busy track, in a lot of cases will be nice. It also makes it easier to pare it down if the director's like, I like the carbis, but there's a little too many. You can just mute one of them. And then the other layer I have is this 20-person party. I have a similar filter. It's a low pass at 1.2 kHz. I'm going to do a similar thing with the other side of this scene, which is the apartment. And I don't need to cover the whole 2 minutes. I just need to cover, the phone call section. So it's about 48 seconds. And we'll need to pick some different sounds for that. I will need an air tone for that, a different pitch hopefully, so that you hear the shift. For Kitty's side of the call here, I've got the neighbors arguing. And I've done a similar thing here where I've got it for just a big chunk. I got the heating pipes. Got some nice distant traffic. This is a really interesting track that I found. It's a high-pitched ringing with like a TV or radio on. Then I've got an extremely loud Italian TV. And then one more layer of traffic. And I've got a low pass on the traffic and the neighbors arguing just because it sounded better. So all together. So the reason I've got these just bricked out for so long, 2 minutes on this one and like a minute for this one, is as the scene goes on, I want these tracks to shift as they naturally will. This is going to have, different carbis that come in and out. The walla is going to change over time. And by having them be long and then just dicing out the parts you don't need, it'll let them naturally progress versus just taking this, or I guess it'd be on these tracks, it'd be more likely, taking this little region here and just cutting it and pasting it and you don't want it to be the same sound over and over again. You don't want to loop. So once I've got them laid out for this back and forth, I can go in and I've got my cuts laid out. Remember, I do 2 frames with the center of the fade being right on the cut. So I can just go Command E, go to the next cut, 1 frame before, because I'm going to do a 2-frame crossfade, A to cut the head off that, and keep going until I get the whole scene checkerboarded. So I've gone through and checkerboarded. I didn't record that because it's extremely mind-numbingly boring. But let's just check out the scene. This is just going to be backgrounds that we just cut, and it's going to be the production sound that we cut in the first 3 episodes.
You should have seen that French fuck's face explode.
Come on.
So we've already got one problem, which is that the dialogue prelaps this cut. So I need to do the same with the background. So I'm going to do the fade longer, and I'm going to hit M, which will nudge it back 6 frames. And it looks like I need to do 1 more for that fade to be at full power by the time we cut.
Explode.
Come on, Jack.
Needs to go a little further. I'm going to hit M twice more and do a longer fade.
Explode.
Come on, Jack, pick up.
You're playing with fire. Hello?
It's me, Kitty.
Fuck the French.
Alex is gonna kill me if he finds out. I called Ranucci to make a deal. I
take
did
it.
it for my baby.
Calm down.
Don't tell me to
Calm down.
I got the heroin.
You got what?
The heroin.
Who else knows?
Eddie and
Now Ranucci.
Just bring it down here.
where's Alec?
Let Jackie take care of it.
Another hoe crying about an abortion.
Yeah, something like that.
French Jack will get you high tonight.
Get the fuck out of here. I got business to handle.
What about dropping the money off?
That's tomorrow.
I could watch it, keep guard.
I got my muscle watching it all night long. Besides, I don't want junkies watching my cash.
Like you don't use.
Not crack. That shit'll kill you.
I'm fucking going. You have a good night, Jack.
Get out of here, fucking junkie.
All right, so you probably noticed that I dipped the volume automation here. The scene changes tone there a little bit, so even though I know that'll probably be done in the mix, it just helps kind of audition how it'll feel with that background walla getting taken down. But anyways, I think that's fine. I could probably add some more spot carbis. So spotted backgrounds are like picking, hey, when he says this, let's have this specific 1973 GTO go by. But I think for now, that is totally fine. And I'd actually like to show you guys some scenes where the backgrounds might be a little more interesting, where I've done some more of that stuff. All right, here's a good example. We've got the apartment, which we just cut in that phone call scene, going from, the quieter apartment to pretty loud urban environment here. And there's some spot effects, there's some traffic construction, and it's just a nice contrast here. And there's melting snow, so that's why I used wet carbis. For exterior scenes on the mono tracks, you need to have some dynamic layers to help the production out, and you get bonus points from the mixer if you time your background carbis with the ones that are already in the production sound. This is the opening of the film. There's some voiceover, and I don't have a lot of layers, but the layers I do have were like really specifically chosen for. So these are some spot backgrounds here. There's some typing. This takes place in the 1980s, the early 80s. So that's why the backgrounds sound a little, you know, old school. Just to go through some layers on this mechanic shop scene, which it's an interior scene, but there's quite a few layers. So that's like some sheet metal being worked on. This is more tool stuff. There's some hammer hits here, I think. The fluorescent buzz. This is just some traffic. This is an LCR traffic. We've got some more distant stereo banging. So I've got all 4 of my mono tracks filled up, and then 4 stereo. This is like welding and grinding, I think. Yeah. And then just like an air handler. So all together, here's a quick example of adding something that, you know, wasn't there, but can add something to the story in the backgrounds.
I gotta go to work. I hope you're in a better place than here.
So sorry for the scratch audio. I just wanted you to hear the dialogue because this church bell I added in thinking that could motivate him saying that line. You know, he hears the church bell, but it can do stuff on a deeper level where it's like, you know, he's maybe thinking about going to church when he was a kid. So you can add some subtle stuff like that that opens up the story and just, you know, it just adds another texture that isn't there visually. Here's an example of, really it's one location, but it's 2 locations in one. So you've got the main mechanic shop area here, but then you've got the bathroom of the mechanic shop area. So which sounds do you carry over and which ones do you shift on the cut? I'll show you what I did. So the hammering carries over the cut, ties the locations together, but the, you know, light buzz is louder in the bathroom. There's some water drip stuff going on. And even though, again, it's an interior, you can do a lot just by adding a bunch of different but not super busy layers. This one's just like an ice pick in your brain. It's not always 2-frame crossfades. Sometimes you need to open that up a little bit, and sometimes you want to prelap the scene to pull the transition forward or like pull people into the next scene. You know, stuff like that can be really effective. And even though we're focusing on just this one scene for this series, I did want to show you guys just some other examples from other parts of the film and kind of give you a sense of what a background ambience edit session is like for an indie feature. For a big studio picture, if you're working on the Avengers or you know, some big end of the world movie, you're gonna have a lot more tracks than this, and you're gonna spend a lot more time on it. But for an independent film with, you know, more of a limited budget, your job is to support the creative intent of the director, maybe add some detail where you can, make sure the M&E's covered, but you don't want to get bogged down spending weeks and weeks of your time on something that most people aren't going to notice and they're not going to hear. If you've done a good job, that will be the case. They won't notice the backgrounds. They'll just be like, man, that movie sounded really good. But most people remember the music. They remember the dialogue, maybe some of the sound effects. The backgrounds are kind of second banana to all that stuff. Still important to do a good job, but just trying to keep the perspective of the big picture. So thank you guys for tuning in. The next episode, we will work on some hard effects, which will include things like doors, gunshots, cars, and probably some sound design too. There's not too much of that in this film, but we'll hit the spots where there is some. So check that out, and I will see you then.